Hey, my name is Kennan Murphy-Sierra. I'm currently a junior at Stanford University studying computer science. I grew up on the East Coast in Washington, D.C., and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, first, some information about getting into college, and second, kind of on my own personal story about my adventure and road on my way to college. I made some cool little flashcards. So there's basically like four major components to a college application. So the first, probably the most important, is your GPA, your high school GPA. So whatever school you apply to, they're really going to care about, are you taking, not only are you getting good grades, but also are you taking good classes at your school. So like, if you have AP classes or IB classes, you should be taking a bunch of those because, from a college perspective, when they see you taking AP and IB classes, they're going to look at the student, they're going to look at your application and say, look, this is a student who takes challenges, right? The student who takes the harder classes, who really just tries to challenge themselves. And then if you get good grades in harder classes, that looks better, much better than getting good grades in normal classes. So it's really something that college recruiters really like to see, is people taking AP, IB classes and just getting good grades overall. So that's GPA. It's really important. Second thing, this one is not as important, but your test scores. So you should take either the SAT or the ACT. So what I did is I actually took both tests because just to get a sense of, you probably would like one test a little bit more because they are very different in nature. Like the SAT had a much harder English section and reading section, which I wasn't as good at. I'm more of a math science person. So I preferred the ACT because it actually had like a science section. And I think the English is a little bit easier on the ACT, and it's kind of like split into like reading and actually like English. And the English part's like, it's not too bad. It's all multiple choice, and actually both tests are like multiple choice, and they both have an essay. But yeah, so ACT, SAT, you need to take one. I recommend that you should try to take both options, really just to see if maybe you really prefer one test over another. And I mean, basically, what colleges want to see is they want to see like not only. So GPA is like how you perform like at your school, but then the SAT and the ACT, they want to kind of see you like at a more like national level, just to kind of see like how you fit in. So then another component is your teacher recommendations. This is a pretty big deal because test scores and GPA, they're just numbers. They don't really mean like that much about who a person is and what they're trying to do. So one thing that's like really important is to just do well in your classes and to have pretty much like be on really good relations with your teachers. Make sure your teachers think that you're a good student who cares about their class and is getting good grades because they're actually trying hard. And one thing that's also true is even if you're not like the best student in a certain class, you could be showing like a lot of effort and a lot of work. And if you're asking a lot of questions throughout the year and really just trying to show that you're like actually trying to learn the material, teachers will see that and like appreciate that too. Like, so for me, when I asked my physics teacher for a recommendation, like I wasn't necessarily the best physics student in the class, and I actually found like the topic was like really hard for me to get at first, and like it was really hard for me to do physics. But I was still giving it my all. I was like working on it a lot and coming into class with like a lot of questions on like any homework or questions before a test. And even like when I get tests back and I got things wrong, I'd go up to the teacher afterwards and kind of just ask questions so I could like understand the material. And I really showed the teacher that I cared about the class and actually like cared about I cared about learning. I wasn't like just being like, oh, like why did I get points off for this? Like you should change my grade. Like that's not the approach I use. I was more about just like wanting to figure out why I got things wrong, so that because ultimately like why are you taking classes? It's so that you can like learn the material, and like really appreciate it. So that's the thing about teacher recommendations. So then the fourth component that's like arguably the most important of all are your college essays. So basically, whatever application you do, each school is going to have essays like specific to that particular school. And so you're supposed to basically, like, essays are the part where you really just get to show like you as a person, and it's like where you get to be your most genuine self. So like what a lot of people say about essays is don't write what you think the college recruiters are going to expect or the answers that they're looking for, because the thing is with the essays, there's no like right or wrong answer, right? They're not going to like reject you just because, oh, well, this person wrote about swimming, this person wrote about track. Well, I like track better, right? That's not the game they're playing. And so basically, like, what they really want to see is just like, who is this person? And so I think one of the biggest things about essays is if you can write something that's like really unique to yourself, and like a story that just really tells a lot about you, that's a lot more important than just writing like, a straight up typical story that you think that they might be expecting to hear. So yeah, those are the four components. I'll just hold them up one more time. So yeah, GPA, SAT, ACT, essays, teacher recommendations. Yeah, so these are kind of the big things for college application. And obviously, like, if you have any questions on any of those things, like, you can obviously go up to any of your teachers or like counselors at school and just ask them about it. But yeah, so that's the first part of what I was going to talk about. So cool. So the second thing that I want to talk about is just kind of like a little bit about my my story of figuring out where I wanted to go. So so this is pretty good like advice, I think, in general, is when you're trying to look at colleges to go to and schools to attend. I mean, really what you should try to do is figure out what it is that you want to study. So in like middle school or high school, like you should be thinking about like what topics are most interesting for me, right? And what topics like am I not a fan of? So like for me, I was more of like a math and sciences kind of guy, and I really didn't like reading and English as much. And although I think history is really cool, like I really hated having to write like essays and papers on like history topics. Like that didn't really appeal to me. It's not something that I wanted to spend like my college years doing. So, I narrowed it down that to eventually like, I want to do engineering. So, I wasn't sure what kind of engineering, but just like engineering in general, like I think is really cool. Just, being able to, look at studies or just apply like equations to like solve real life problems, or like to build things or create things. I always thought that was like really fun. And so yeah, I was just, engineering was kind of what I wanted to do, and so I had to just kind of narrow down and pick schools based on what I thought were like really good engineering schools. So that's how I did my search. And what I would recommend in terms of applying to schools, you should kind of look at like around 6 to 7 schools to apply to. So one really good way to think about how to pick schools is, so you're gonna have a pretty good sense of what your GPA is and what your SAT or ACT test scores are when you're applying. And what you should do is you should pick like two schools or 3 schools that are kind of just like maybe like your GPA or SAT scores like aren't totally like in the range of that school, but like schools that would be just completely awesome if you could get in, like dream schools, reach schools that you just be like, that would be so awesome if I could go there. Like that school's just like awesome. So like 2 or 3 of those schools, call them like your reach schools. Then you should pick like 2 or 3 target schools, where it's basically schools where it's like you pretty much like fit the criteria, and you basically like these schools would be great. If I went there, like I would actually have a great time. The studies would be great. Everything would just be like good about the school. And then you should pick 2 schools like as your safety schools to basically be like, even if I didn't write my best application, I would still like most likely get in, like for sure. So you have like, so you can basically break it down into like 3 sets of schools. And that's a really good way to just kind of think about like applying to college in general, instead of just picking out like random schools, like, oh, what about this one? Oh, what about this one? Just if you can break it down to like those 3 criteria of like, these are my reach schools, these are my target schools, these are my safety schools, then it'll really help you when you're trying to like go forth with your application. And so that's basically what I did is, for engineering, I picked out, which schools are like my dream schools, which schools are my target schools, which schools are my safety schools. And that's basically how I did my engineering college application process. And so I guess a 5th component that I would want to add on, which I didn't really put on the note card, was just kind of like your extracurriculars and things that you do outside of school. So one thing that's really important is just to find something that you really like to do, something that you really like to spend time on. So for me in high school, that was music and Russian. So those are like kind of like my two things. And so in terms of music, I was in my high school's marching band for 4 years and drumline for 4 years, and I would go compete at like the district and regional and state level. And then I was also in like a youth orchestra outside of high school that would meet once a week, and we'd have like 4 concerts a year. And then I did like a percussion ensemble too. And then I also got together with a couple friends and played drum set in a rock band for just a few like school events for fun. And yeah, so I mean, I did a lot of music, and a lot of my summers I actually spent at music camps. just because I really liked it. It was just a lot of fun, and it was cool, at least for the summer, to basically just do nothing but music for like 3 summers, and not really worry about school and homework. So that's one thing that I recommend is, for your summers, like, don't completely waste your summers, because I mean, for colleges it's pretty cool when they look at your application. They kind of want to see like what you did over your summers. So there's a lot of things you can do. So you could either go like to find some camp that you'd really like to do, or like find something fun that like fits some of your interests. But like one thing that is really cool that colleges like to see, and it's pretty good experience overall, is if you just get a job and if you work over the summer, that's actually really good, because I mean, work experience is always valuable. And for colleges, if they see like a student who's like had a job, it really shows like that this person's taking on like a responsibility. And if you have a job, you always have to report to somebody, so it's like a lot of just responsibility, and like I'm sure you're gonna learn practical skills in like whatever job you do. So that's another thing that's like really good. And so in terms of Russian, there were I did a few like competitions that my school did, and we had a Russian honor society at my high school, and I held a leadership position in that. And so I guess that's one big thing for colleges, is not only do they want to see like what you're doing over your summers or how you're spending your like extracurricular activities, like whether you're doing sports or music or some kind of art or community service or something with your church group, whatever it is, they really do want to see like students who are people and like are involved in doing things. So I think that's something that's like really important to take into account, right? Like I mean, studies, like, very important. Like, don't get me wrong. Like if you don't like do well in school, like that's a bigger thing that won't get you in than if you don't do a lot of stuff like in your spare time. But I mean, colleges want to see smart people, right? And they want to see people trying really hard, right, in school, and they want to see people who like are people and are doing things like outside of school for their time, right? Because if you think about like your college application as an interview, right? And if someone brings you in and then they start talking to you and they're like, okay, so like tell me about what your interests are, right? And if the only thing that you do is you go to school and you study and you get grades and you go to school and that's like all you do, you're probably going to be a pretty boring person, to be honest, right? But if your college application is kind of like, all right, I go to school, I get good grades, I try really hard to be the best student I can, but I also like am really into sports and I've been playing on this team for 4 years, and like we won some kind of championship, or we lost a lot, but it was still a really good bonding experience, and it was just I gave it my all every single time at every practice. Or I was really into music and I played this thing, or like, oh, I'm really into painting and I painted a lot of things. That's something that's like really interesting, right? And a lot of colleges, they're looking for not only just smart people but like interesting people. So like always keep that in mind, and like I'm sure that you have some interests that you really like to do, or that you could like expand upon, or like do something over the summer with. So that's something that I really highly recommend. And yeah, so that's pretty much it that I have to say. So yeah, my name is Kennan Murphy-Sierra. I went to college, and you can too.